Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming, the show where we take a look at gaming creepypastas. This one, we have a look at a creepypasta called the Systelien Specter, a story about a company who seems to be housing a 4D gaming project that can not only put you directly into the game, might even harm you a little bit. I don't know, really putting the realism in horror games. So sit back, relax, and see what the Systelien Specter has to offer. Back in May of 2010, my best friend Andy and I wanted to make a video game that we thought was going to change virtual reality gaming and the horror genre forever. We were both out of university, me with a degree in computer programming and him with digital art design. Both of us were avid gamers. I think we played a bit of about everything: racing, JRPGs, MMOs, sports, you name it. We wanted to make a game unlike anything you could ever get coming from overseas. We'd call it an ambitious goal for a couple aspiring indie game developers like us. But both of us were ambitious guys. Andy was a big fan of horror, and was actually the first to come up with the idea. We had heard of a 4-dimensional theaters that was being introduced in places like Korea and London, where you weren't just watching a movie, but you were feeling it and smelling it. If the movie was set in a pine forest, there were triggers that would release the scent of pine to the audience. Likewise, if the characters were standing in the windy deck of a ship, fans would start blowing to mimic the conditions of the ship in the theater. All of it was to create a more realistic, interactive experience for the viewer, and we thought it would be awesome if we tried to implement that with a 4D game. Obviously, we didn't have the manpower to make an entire game by ourselves. We were in a lot of debt because of school, and wouldn't have been able to afford the virtual reality hardware in our wildest dreams. That, and we had no idea how to develop the technology needed to create the 4D gaming experience. Throughout the following summer, we networked like crazy, pitching our ideas to different devs, both indie and big time. And there was interest, but the 4D concept was still very much in development, and no one was sure if they wanted to invest time and resources in it, without the assurance that it was going to, lift off. I won't bore you with the details of how it happened, but we finally hit a breakthrough in September with an independent company called Systelien, who contacted us after our attempts to pitch the idea to them. They thought it had potential and were interested in onboarding us as writers and programmers. The company itself would take the rights for the game, and of course there would be a team that would make the final decisions during all stages of development. It was still more than we could have ever hoped for. There was a team of 150 people, a third of which were hardware developers. The controller was built into a padded inclined chair with a minimalist headset that fitted around the player's eyes and ears. The joystick and buttons could be swapped on the arms to accommodate if the player were left-handed or right-handed. Really high-tech, right? Where the money was really sunk, though, was in the environmental simulators and the sensors and nodes that would be attached to the player's body to monitor their physical status. Like I said, this game was meant to be a horror game. We settled on the story of an unnamed character going into a haunted mansion to get rid of evil spirits, and getting stalked by a demon. The most cliched plot and setting you could think of, but that was what we were going for. We wanted something that could be easily associated with fear. The idea that there was a demon that fed off fear and would find you more easily if you were afraid. First, it would scare and drive the character crazy, then it would, kill him or her. The monitors attached to the player analyzed the physical signs that the player was afraid: rapid heartbeat, dilated pupils, harsh breathing, clammy or sweaty skin, etc., and use that information to determine how aggressively the demon would act. You could think of it as a social experiment. You could see how well a person could stay calm under pressure. Theoretically, a completely calm person could make it through the entire game without much danger, but that scares and the atmospheres wouldn't let you go through the first level without, making you anxious at least. The real fun started when the demon came after you. We wanted to keep it subtle, no jump scares. That was cheating the player out of the experience, really. If you think about it, people with real paranormal experiences never report a demon breaking through a glass window and going for your throat, right? They report brushes against the skin, whispering in your ears, a loud sound in the distance, even tingling or electrical sensations. Those were the kind of things we recreated. We programmed the system to deliver those audio and sensory cues when the player reached a certain level of anxiety. The more scared you were, the more scares you received. At the beginning of the game, you might hear a heavy breathing or footsteps behind you. You might even feel cold spots as you navigated the mansion. As you progressed, the game became more tense. You might feel a grip on your arm, from a blood pressure-like cushion on the chair that tightened around the muscle, or a hiss directly in your ear, along with the feeling of breath. It was elaborate, and it took forever to produce, but when they hooked you in, it was amazing. I had the privilege of being one of the people to test it, really, as it was being produced. They put me in a chair, turned off all the lights, and would play the game through the headset as well as project the images you were seeing onto a wall so the team would see it too. The graphics were realistic. They got the rooms of the mansion down on the last detail. About a year and a half after the sensors were developed and implemented into the system, we started looking for beta testers. We started advertising in magazines and message boards for people to come in blind and play the game, giving any criticism or reporting any glitches they experienced. The majority of the feedback we received was positive, and after several revisions, we could safely say we had a successful project. Of peculiar note, though, were the reports from the beta testers in which they claimed to get the feeling that someone was in the room with them, and that they were getting tingling or hot-cold sensations in part of the bodies where the nodes were not attached. The room where the chair and the interfacer were located were kept clear, aside from the player, of course, as often as possible. And the team was separated from the room by a one-way mirror. We would have been able to see if anyone was in the room apart from the player, and in 9 out of the 10 cases that this was reported, there was no one. The other 1/10 were when a technician was coming in to check the interface. There's times where we would disable and re-enable certain audio and sensory stimulations to further test which ones gave more stimuli than the others. During one playthrough, the player might have cold spots, and then during the next, those would be disabled. We never told the players which ones were activated and which were not. The strangest cases, though, were when someone was playing the game for the first time and would report a cue that we clearly had disabled. In one particular case, a middle-aged woman reported that her hair was being tugged gently. Now, I can tell you this right now. That was never programmed into the game at any point in time. It was an odd occurrence, but one that could easily have been choked up in the imagination, I guess. Actually, we assumed that most of the cases really were due to the power of suggestion. We just cautioned the rest of the beta testers not to talk about what they went through so that the people coming in could get as authentic an experience as possible. As tends to happen in these situations, people started spreading rumors. Some of my favorite rumors were the one that made the Systelien staff out to be cultists who were secretly sacrificing the beta testers to the demon portrayed in the game. I have no idea how long that held up as long as it did, but, since there was absolutely no reports or injuries on or off site, and every single one of the testers came out of the building alive. The internet and gossip does strange things to people, I guess. However, it was rumors like that was starting to give Systelien a bad reputation. We decided it was time to bring in the media to defeat some of the rumors. We hadn't wanted to have reporters, fearful that, of other gaming companies would try to copy our methods, though, but now it just seemed like a really good time as any. We got several offers and wound up talking to one of the most popular gaming magazines. The reporting team came in and interviewed us about the games and the 4D techniques used. We used the opportunity to show them around the building and debunk the rumors about animal and human sacrifice. It was actually pretty funny. After the interview, the reporting team wanted to try out the game for themselves. They all had good things to say about it, and when the article was published, donations and other requests for interviews began streaming in. Andy and I said we should have let the media come in sooner for all the benefits we were getting. The more we searched Systelien's message boards, the more we started noticing threads crop up about people who claimed that they were experiencing the things in the game after they had left Systelien and gone home. They were going through some supernatural phenomenon in their everyday life, as they had in the game. In every claim, they said that they would feel as though someone was getting very, very close to them, looking over their shoulders and breathing down their necks. I guess that was one thing about the demon in the game that we had neglected to mention. It had no sense of personal space. The reports eventually looked, it involved both minor and violent poltergeist activity for some reason, and people would be going through this for days afterwards. The reports helped to spread the word even more, but it didn't help the persisting rumors that the testers were being possessed. The more popular thread where the reports were being archived affectionately, called the demon causing these incidents as the Systelien demon or the Systelien Specter. Better, I guess you could say. Then came the day when a young man, only 17 years old, and we'll call him John just for anonymity purposes, claimed that he wanted to file a lawsuit against us, as he had been scratched during the time playing the game. As I remember it, John had been doing fine up until he had reached the basement of the mansion, and then he had screamed for us to let him out. The only evidence of the scratches were pictures taken after he had exited the building. The scratches down on the pictures were deep and red, clearly not something that had been dealt by a human, maybe by a machine, but an inspection of the chair revealed no sharp parts sticking out. The lawsuit was eventually dropped since there was no way to prove he hadn't scratched himself prior to coming in. It's not like, we do a full body examination before sitting our testers down on the chair. It was at this point we decided to stop bringing in random beta testers and let the game, just test it ourselves for the last stages in development. I was one of the first to be strapped in. They had added so much stuff to the game, Yeah, and so many more cues that I barely recognized from the first time I had played. I remember going down a foyer staircase after exploring this series of, darkened hallways lit by old Victorian-era lamps, feeling my palms sweat and the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The wind outside the mansion had been howling for the last half hour, and it sounded like someone was whistling a funeral march. I paused on the stairs to look out of the windows, searching for any weird textures needing to be fixed, when I feel a tingling along the back, my upper back, along my spine. Like someone was pressing his or her chest against my back. It wasn't just in the game, I could feel the press in reality. I reached up and felt only the chair. The thing that really set me off, though, was the voice that spoke my name into my ear. It was whispered and very clear, no mistaking it in the wind. I spun the camera around, though I knew there was nothing to see. The demon had always been invisible. And now I knew why some of our testers had joked about feeling violated while playing. I just assumed Andy had played a joke on me, but he swore up and down that he didn't put any coding in the game for the demon to say the player's name. That would have been my department. Not his. He just designed skins. Still, I remained convinced that someone was just having fun with me. There wasn't even a place to input your name. Someone must have pre-recorded it. I played through the rest of the area and then headed home to file my report. It was another late night. I had been pulling the late shift for a couple weeks and our deadline was drawing closer. We had been having decent weather until about 2 in the morning, when the wind picked up and the rain was coming down in buckets. Andy and I had come home from the Midwest, and were used to bipolar weather. I just worked on and paid it no mind, really. Until the power went out. Anyways, I grabbed my flashlight, feeling all the anxiety from the time in the game returning. This was a different story, though, and I knew that. My house wasn't haunted, and I'd never believed in ghosts my entire life. My brain said it was ridiculous, but my pounding heart told a different story. I couldn't help but feel every draft and hear every creak of the floorboards as I went down to the generator, which of course is in the cellar. The wooden steps lead me down into the darkness, and I have to admit that. By the time I reached the concrete, I was considering just going back upstairs and burrowing myself into my bed. I forced myself to cross the floor to the generator and turn it on. Immediately the backup lights flickered on, casting a red hue over the dusty shelves and rusty tools on the workbench. So now I gotta be in hell too, congratulations. This way back wasn't nearly as bad as the way down, and I reminded myself that everything I had experienced in the game had been just that. In the game. There was nothing to worry about. The demon, the Systelien, Specter, or whatever. It wasn't an enemy, it was an enemy made out of ones and zeros, that's all. It couldn't do anything to me outside of the game. I was halfway up the stairs, about at the same point I had been in the game, when I had heard my name, actually, when I distinctly felt someone tightly grab my wrists, as in squeezing like my wrists were being juiced tight. I screamed and dropped the flashlight, which went off on impact, and there was no one there. But I still slapped at where I imagined the hand had come from, and clambered up the stairs. I didn't stop until I was out the front door and into my driveway. Getting drenched and not even caring, I whipped out my cell phone and punched in Andy's number. He said he knew how I felt during his test playthrough. He had accidentally backed his character into a fire since he'd been so busy keeping an eye on the rest of the room. We had all laughed at the mistake, but he had mentioned that the fact that, after we'd taken him out of the game, he had felt a burning in his lower calf. Later, when we looked at his leg after getting home, he discovered he had a first-degree burn right where his character had touched the fire. I drove to his house and, looked at the leg myself. He had already spread ointment on the area and bandaged it up, but when he pulled it back, I was staring at a red and swollen burn wound. Out of morbid curiosity, I called the other members of our team who had tested the game that day. It was the same story all around. In the game, Jill had stood in front of the window that had been shattered and then later cut her hands while picking up the jagged pieces of a ceramic vase, which had suddenly fallen to the floor. Matthew's character had been crushed by a falling bookshelf, and then when he had been getting into his car, his door had closed when he wasn't ready and 3 fingers had been broken. I looked at my wrist again, where dark, purplish bruises were forming. These couldn't be coincidences anymore. I don't know what the hell was going on, but it wasn't just a game anymore. The next day was a holiday, so everyone at Systelien was off. I invited anyone willing to go back into the game, to try it, and play through the game one more time. Andy and I had gone through the possibilities. The point of the entire game had been for the character to go into the mansion, exorcise this demon. They could do it by collecting special candles and then lighting them in a circle in the attic of the mansion. And after some other steps were done, the demon would be forced out of the house and everything would be going back to normal. It had been a crazy night, and at any other time, I thought we would have been crazy for discussing these things. We thought that maybe, by completing the game and by extension the ritual, we could stop whatever the hell was going on. After all, no one to this day, had ever finished the game from beginning to end. The game was as complete as it's ever going to be. Andy volunteered to play, which I was grateful. Maybe it was cowardly, but I didn't want to be the one to go in, hell no. The room was frigidly cold as we attached the nodes in. We threw a blanket over Andy to make sure he didn't freeze. The rest of us, 5 in total, not including Matthew, who had gone to the hospital to treat his hand, gathered behind the one-way glass to watch. It was eerie, watching his progress through the game. I knew all of those corridors so well, having labored over the game files for many months, yet now everything looked new. Now that I was sure that I knew what the game was capable of, I watched Andy's heart rate and rise and fall on my monitor. His skin temperature analyzers went haywire as he rounded every corner. As was supposed to happen, he felt the demon close in when his fear spiked, but this time around its interactions were low-key, almost subdued. I fought against my suspicion that it was just biding its time. The demon was made of ones and zeros. Numbers, again, can't hurt anyone. I thought this even as I rubbed my bruised wrists. It took 4 hours for Andy to make it all the way through. He didn't even take a bathroom break. He just wanted to get this done as much as we did. He crept through the halls, doing his best to keep calm despite the advances of the demon. He collected the 6 candles needed for the ritual and made his way up the attic. Then, things started happening that were definitely not in the programming. The paintings and potted plants in the game began shaking and flying off the walls, clearly aimed for his character. In the safety of the monitoring room, 2 filing cabinets overturned before sliding across the floor and knocking over 2 staff members. The wires attached to the wall disconnected and sprayed sparks around the room. Grabbing, a fire extinguisher, I prepped to extinguish any flames that crept up. Andy just placed the candles on the floor of the attic and was using an old lighter to light them. He was able to get the 4th candle lit before he suddenly buckled in his chair, screaming for us to stop the game. When we rushed in, I saw his hands flailing, as though he was trying to tear off the nodes and sensors glued to his body. Maybe that was part of it. But when I got a closer look, I realized he was fighting with something invisible that was holding him down under the chair. His shirt and face had been slashed, and blood dribbling from the wounds. I was afraid I was going to break his arm since I was pulling so hard to get him out of the chair. Finally, we'd got him free and out of the room, slamming the door behind us. Andy's character had already died, and the game over screen mocked us as we scrambled to call an ambulance. I didn't sleep for the rest of the day, and the following night as I waited in the hospital, Andy's wounds were worse than he thought. There was a massive amount of internal bleeding, and we hadn't even known about. The doctors tried to stem the blood loss with transfusions, but their efforts were for nothing. Andy had passed away early in the morning. A week later, I saw a news special about the death and its connection to the game in Systelien. I couldn't blame whoever had babbled. The police blamed Andy's death on the system malfunctioning. As though we could explain the scratches and the internal trauma, our supervisors again didn't care. They ordered the project to be shut down, and I was grateful. I never wanted to see the game again. The only way I was ever going back to the Systelien building was if the room was demolished and the chair was dismantled, and to be honest, I wouldn't have been surprised if anyone who tried to take it apart was attacked as well. I left the company when the announcement was made that the game would be discontinued. People on the forums expressed everything from disappointment to relief. The game was over. For weeks I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. I moved away from the town, and the memories I had of Andy. My coworkers held a farewell party for me, despite the fact that they probably had the right to blame me for everything, really. They said I had helped make a game that would never be forgotten by anyone who played it. That was all well and good, but I was desperate to forget and spend the rest of my life trying to do so. I was always keeping 2 eyes on the shadows and jumping at every little creak. There was this little fear that I would hear my name whispered into my ear again, which would mean that whatever I had created had followed me. And I never want to think about that possibility. The only thing I could do was to try and sleep and ignore the times when I felt an invisible, clammy hand stroke my face. Well, that was a pretty sweet story. Quite new, actually, and the concept hasn't really been done in this sort of manner, but one thing that's stayed is the fact that the tech showcased here that would track you already kind of exists, and that's what makes it really scary. Hardware such as the new Kinect, which tracks your body incredibly precisely and even scan your heart rate, and then if you combine that with hardware such as the Oculus Rift, which would offer some real scares given, again, the 4D environment looking around, then this could really exist. Now, realistically, there is no company like this that exists, or at least one that's really known publicly. There was one Kickstarter game I remember, but that never went anywhere. It got funded a lot, but it didn't really go somewhere. Now, for all we know, this shit could really exist and be used for some truly nefarious purposes. I mean, technically, it makes sense. But, I'm gonna kill some of the paranoia out there. This company actually doesn't exist, so sleep soundly tonight, but the fact this game does have a basis in technical reality makes it seem very plausible that out there, this game could really be coded. It's possible to make it together with the stuff we have nowadays. Now, as far as the story goes, the build-up was really good, and this was quite enjoyable to read all the way through. The more we looked into, the more we thought about it. A game like this, again, could really, really exist. Now, the burning and the scratching that was, shown throughout the story, that's a little exaggerated and wouldn't be realistic at all unless the thing actually did harm you, which I don't really see happening. Unless, this company really were cultists and they were into that human sacrifice stuff. But even then, you'd think they use a direct approach. But in the end, this really did kick into overdrive and killed a person. Now, if this were to actually happen, every news media in North America and around the world would cover this up to a month and a half. And honestly, if it happened, I'd be scared shitless. Now, this is the only story I can really sit and understand, and never wanting to touch the game again. So I get that ending and it makes sense here, truly. And, you gotta think about it. Maybe to some people this was all in the mind, and it could have been until, Andy had gotten wasted. In the end, this was a fantastic story, and I urge you all to check it out, links in the description below. The scary thing is, it could actually exist, but, probably doesn't. Or maybe it does. I'll let you to dwell on that. But in the end, this has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Mudaharn. I am out.